Hi, everyone. Thanks so much again for joining the webinar today. My name is Jody Golden. I think most of you probably know me, but I'm the director here at the Office of Community Rural Affairs. And we've been working hard on this con plan that we put out. And so we've already received a good number of comments and feedback thus far. And I think you'll see today we've already made some changes to the proposed ideas that we've come out with previously. But I just wanted to make sure everyone does realize that this is just a proposed draft. Nothing is final. And as I mentioned, as you'll see in this webinar today, we've already made some changes based on the feedback that we've received. You know, Okra has the honor of serving all of our communities across the state, but our focus with our CDBG dollars are our small rural communities. And so, as you know, there are real needs out there in rural Indiana, and we need your help in creating a program that effectively addresses those needs and makes rural Indiana a place where people really want to be. So before Eric gets started, I just wanted to briefly discuss the decision-making process on the drafting of this proposal. Every aspect of the CDBG programs were reviewed. Eric and his team researched trends and data from the previous few years in regards to a number of applications, the dollar amounts, the usage, bids, timeliness, a number of factors. From there, we had some intense discussions here internally as to why we were making the proposed changes that we've made, and we wanted to share some of that why with you today. This isn't necessarily to get you to agree with the changes, but it's to share more information regarding these programs with you and how we got to where we are. Regardless, I want to assure you again, these are proposals were thoughtful and intentional, and this is just a draft. This is a process where we encourage and accept all public comment, and it's extremely helpful in ensuring that we're doing what's best for the program and the communities across the state. Again, I can't stress enough that this is a draft, and we want your feedback. I hope you've known since I've been at Okra that I take your feedback seriously and we take it with value. And so after the webinar today, you'll see that Eric and his team will be taking some questions should you have them based on the information that we present today. And then we would certainly encourage you to give us more feedback. If you have it, we will be having the public hearing on March 17th. And with that, you probably will see, we're probably anticipating an updated draft that may have some changes based off of even today's feedback. So please continue to submit your comment, continue to submit your feedback, and we're happy to answer any questions at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'll turn it to Eric. But I also just want to thank you for what you do for our communities and for helping Okra serve our communities across the state. So thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Just before we get started, I wanted to go over a couple just WebEx items. We are accepting questions via the chat function. If you do not see the chat function, the easiest way to access that is go to the bottom center of your screen with your mouse, and you should see a bunch of round circles pop up. And the one that looks like a thought bubble is what you will want to click on, and the chat function will pop up. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started in going through some of the changes. First, though, I want to talk about the process for the consolidated plan and kind of where we are at with the consolidated plan. As Jody mentioned, the current plan that we've posted is just a draft, and we are in what we call our public comment period. So we did a lot of work prior in the preparation period of collecting feedback from prior years, looking at trends and data we saw within the applications, and then looking at all the various changes that we've talked about. Many of the changes you'll see were actually things that we started looking at and investigating a few years ago when I started. Then we determined kind of what some of those proposed changes are, and then we went through a number of internal revisions and reviews of those draft changes. Finally, we drafted the plan that is posted on our website, and we released that draft. So that's where we are. We have released the draft, and we have started collecting that public comment. I, for one, am very excited about the level of interest we are seeing already with the draft that we've posted. It makes our job much easier in receiving feedback because we have insight into how the proposed changes will impact all the communities across Indiana. The next step will be an updated draft of the consolidated plan. As I go through many of the changes today, you will notice that we've already made some adjustments on the proposals based on the feedback we've received. So prior to the public hearing, we are anticipating publishing an updated draft with changes to what's been posted. And then we'll have the public hearing. That public hearing is on March 17th and at the various locations. For information about the public hearing, you can go to the main CDBG website and see all the locations and all of the details. The final piece of the kind of final main step is finalizing the consolidated plan. So all the feedback that we've gotten so far and all the feedback that we will get, we will review that and see what changes and adjustments need to be done before we finalize the plan. We will finalize the plan, and then we will submit it to HUD. Once we submit it to HUD, HUD normally has some comments and asks for some adjustments. We will make those adjustments, and then we will post the finalized plan on our website. Once we post the finalized plan on our website, that is what will be the programming and policies going forward when we start fiscal year 2020. So that's an overview of the process. One thing that has happened since we released the original draft, we now have our actual allocation from HUD. So our estimated allocation, we estimated it to be $30.5 million. And so that was what you saw originally in the draft. We know our actual allocation is $31.7 million. Based on that, we made some adjustments already to our proposed allocations for FY 2020. So you'll see housing, we are now setting that at the 10%, as we have done in the past. We also have made a small increase into the blight clearance program and Main Street revitalization and the public facilities program. You will also know that in this proposed allocation, we are actually splitting WDW and SIP. Based on the public feedback that we've already received, we believe that splitting those programs and maintaining them separate is in the best interest of all of our communities. So we also did a small increase to what was initially being proposed for those projects. On the Responsive Needs Fund, or as it was listed in the draft, the Needs Responsive Fund, still working on the name for that. We've actually zeroed that out, but we are going to maintain the availability of that program. And I will talk in more detail later about that program. Urgent need, a similar situation. We've always had this on the books, but we have it at 0 to make sure that it is available for those communities that need it. We had a slight increase in planning funds, and then technical assistance and admin remain the same based on what was being proposed. So that is the proposed allocation. So one of the big questions that we've been receiving is related to the $9 million for Stellar region. And so with Stellar is a program that we actually announce and build prior to each action plan and consolidated plan. And so many of the changes with Stellar were actually announced a few years ago, starting in 2017, 2018. And so with some of the questions and comments we're receiving, we want to recap and discuss how all of these changes came about and kind of why you're seeing that $9 million number right now. So here's how the breakdown of the Stellar allocation goes. So for the 2019 Stellar award, we moved to 2 regions. And we increased the award amount from $2 million per community to $4.5 million per region. And this is because the regions cover multiple communities, and we wanted to have the same level of impact. So that gave us that total of $9 million. Now, you did not see that total $9 million last year because we wanted to spread out the money to ensure that we were still meeting our timeliness and expenditure rates set by HUD. So what I have here in this chart shows you kind of how that phase-in works. So in FY 2019, so that was last year, you saw the $4.5 million. And so that was the first part of the award for those 2 regions from the 2018 Stellar. Then in 2019, which is the year this Consolidated Plan and Action Plan are for, you see a $4.5 million for the 2 2018 Stellar regions. So that is the rest of their award. And then you see the $3.5 million for the 2019 Stellar designee. So that's that single region that we had for 2019. And then you see the $1 million for the 2019 finalists. Now, one thing some of you may not be aware of is for the 2019 Stellar, when we moved to the single region, we still wanted to reward those finalists that achieve that status because we know the amount of work that they put in. So for finalists, they split $1 million. So that's where you see that $1 million comes from. And then we projected out to 2021, you will see the $4.5 million for the 2019, $3.5 million for the 2020 designee, and then $1 million for the 2020 finalists. So that is how the Stellar allocation works. So when you're seeing that $9 million number, it's not just for one region or one community. It is built up over a number of years. So with that, I also want to talk about the impact that we see from Stellar. We are working on an actual impact study, but we have not completed that yet because we're just seeing the regions start. But I wanted to look at just the communities that are being impacted by the Stellar region. So for the 2018 Stellar, we had 2 regions, New Allen Alliance and Health and Heritage. And as you see on the screen, those cover a number of communities from varying populations. So the number next to each community is their population. So you see the variation from 20,000 all the way down to 1,500. So we still are covering quite a number of communities, and the impact that we're already seeing is substantial. So one community, Leo Cedarville, they are submitting an application here to do a streetscape project that would completely transform their downtown. And so that is one thing that, you know, as Stellar region, yes, it is a region that gets the award, but it's the communities that are part of that region that feel the impact. So next, we will look at the 2018 Stellar region. So that included, that was the Marshall County, and that included all of these communities. Again, a big variety of the population, as small as 640 with La Paz, up to about 10,000 with Plymouth. And then we look at our finalists. So our finalists, they are also getting the benefit of that splitting that $1 million. So all 3 of those are working on how they are going to split that amongst their communities, or how they're going to use it to as a catalyst for either coming in for Stellar this year, or even just looking at other projects for CDBG in the future. So that's kind of a recap of Stellar and where that $9 million number came from. Now we're going to go into the proposed program changes for MSRP, PFP, SIP, and WDW. We'll also talk about the idea with the Needs Responsive Fund. So first up is the Main Street Revitalization Program. So this kind of goes into the why of some of these changes. So I'm going to first talk about the why and then go over the changes that are being proposed. So first off, there were a number of changes at the national level for Main Street. And so as a result of that, we ended up looking at making changes to our Indiana Main Street program. As part of that, we have a Indiana Main Street Council, and a lot of the changes came from them. We also, though, one of the big things was we wanted to ensure the capacity of local Main Street to complete the funded projects. As many of you have experienced, with the way bids have come in and just other kind of variables, sometimes Main Street projects, especially facades, are difficult to get done, or they run long, or they're overbid. And so those are all things we are taking into consideration when we are making these proposed changes. So the first proposed change was align with the new Main Street groups. And we're going to go into that here on the next slide. So the one recommendation from the Main Street Council was to have a nationally accredited set-aside. That set-aside will basically allow for when a nationally Main Street comes in and applies, they will get some priority over those that are not nationally accredited. Another big adjustment that we have been recommending is in the local match for the facade projects. So we have the HRGP program, which has a 50% match requirement for funds. That program is very similar to what we do with facades. So the idea was to align those two programs, and with facades do a 50% match as with HRGP. One thing to know, and this is one thing I've heard from several comments already made, the local match for streetscape would stay at 20%. Again, this is what we are proposing. So, definitely looking for comment on how that would impact communities and those that are looking at these types of projects. So with that, I want to talk about the Main Street level. Now, this is an area that I am not as familiar with, so I've asked Matt Crouch to come in and speak about the new Main Street group.
Good morning, everyone. So just quickly, kind of what we're doing, and as Eric mentioned, this is based upon, the recommendations of not only the Main Street Council, but also the National Main Street Center, and speaking with other coordinating programs across the nation. So looking at aligning what we're doing here in Indiana with similar efforts in states like Georgia and Oregon. So, we're looking at having 3 different categories for our main streets. And, we've outlined them already on the screen. We'll be making this announcement formally on April 20th. But we've already been talking around the state about this, and so you can see that with the national accredited main streets, those that are meeting the 10 standards that have been identified by the National Main Street Center, they're going to be eligible for planning and Main Street revitalization funds. Then we're going to have the Indiana accredited Main Street category as well, and so they'll be eligible for planning funds on their, downtown streetscapes or facades. And then once an organization or community has been already designated for a period of 3 years of active status at the Indiana accredited or above, they'll be eligible for the Main Street Revitalization Program. Now, those communities that are part of the 137 Main Street organizations around the state, they're going to already be grandfathered into the system. So they'll already be eligible for the planning funds and the Main Street revitalization funds, really until we go through this process of self-evaluation and determining which category you're on. So if you're already a Main Street organization and you've completed the requirements of attending a training as of 2019 and you've submitted your assessment which is due as of midnight this coming Sunday of the 8th, and turn in your ROI data, then you'll still be eligible for those funds this coming round. And then the last kind of category is the Downtown Alliance. And so those are kind of a stepping stone to become a Main Street accredited and really starting to work on all of the standards of the program. And so those, while we're helping build the capacity of those organizations for that Downtown Alliance, they will not be eligible for CDBG funds until we've really been able to help them utilize the 4-point approach and help them build capacity in their committees and create work plans and move further into the program and just really start functioning at a higher level. So I'm going to turn back to Eric now.
Thanks, Matt. So just a few last pieces with the Main Street Revitalization Program. We had a couple changes, proposed changes with the program-specific items. And again, the big why behind these are to recognize streetscape and facade projects should be scored differently because we see a clear difference between those types of projects, but also to reward communities that have transformative and unique projects. And so our proposal is to have a streetscape-specific object that awards program-specific points for unique design or branding efforts. And then for facades, having program-specific points awarded based on density of the number of facades within a given area. And so those are the proposed changes to the program-specific items related to the MSRP program. So now we'll move into the public facilities program. So the big thing with this program is that we looked at is how do we distribute these funds widely across the state? And how do we make sure that we are distributing them in the fairest, most equitable way? And so with that, one thing we saw was if we did a reduction of the maximum amount and increase the local match, we could then potentially fund more projects and distribute the funds more broadly across the state. This is one item we've heard a lot of feedback on. So again, this is just the proposed change. So when you're looking at this one, look at both the changes separately. So on the grant amount, is the current level of $500,000, does that make the most sense, or is it possible that we could reduce that to kind of distribute grant funds a little bit more widely? And then look at the local match. Does it make sense to increase the local match to, again, spread those funds out a little bit more? Or are there other reasons to maintain the local match at the way it is? One thing we've seen when we look at the averages for the last several rounds with the local match, the average was 22% on the last round. So for us, when we look at this, that means many communities are putting in close to that 20% level already. And so that's one piece that, how do we balance this out and balance this distribution across the state? So as I mentioned earlier, we did split the stormwater and wastewater drinking water. So this slide actually relates to both WDW and SIP. And basically this all goes to rewarding communities for sustainable projects and actions. So as we work with communities, we know they are really interested in how do they, once they get a wastewater, a drainage, or a stormwater project that has been implemented, how do they sustain that and make sure that their infrastructure stays at the appropriate level? So our suggested changes and proposed changes are all related to the program-specific points for this item. First off, we are saying let's reduce the financial gap. So currently the financial gap is at 25 points. We are proposing to reduce that to 10, and that actually is in line with what we are seeing as the average for the financial gap. We are not seeing many communities have a financial gap up at the $25 level. So then the next is update the user rate benchmarks, and I'm going to go into more specifics about that here in just a little bit. And then reward projects with green infrastructure components. So when we talk green infrastructure components, we are not just talking about environmentally friendly projects, but we're also talking about sustainability. And so we've done, and a lot of communities have done these types of projects already. And we know that they do cost a little bit more upfront, but in the long run, they help communities save. And so this is our way of kind of rewarding those communities for taking that upfront cost on to have long-term sustainability. So that's kind of those adjustments to the program-specific points, all with this idea of rewarding communities for sustainable projects and actions. And so I apologize, this slide is also mislabeled. This is for WDW and SIP. And this is specifically for the user rates. So first off, there were two legislative task forces, a water task force and a stormwater task force, that both made similar recommendations that OCRA should look at aligning our programs more with SRF. One of the areas specifically that they call out was the user rates. Our user rates for OCRA were established many years ago and have not ever been updated. So this is our way of saying, okay, we do need to update them, and what is the best way to do that? By making sure also communities understand how those rates are going to be updated and what their targets are. We also wanted to create kind of an automatic update so that communities knew as they were planning out years in advance of what the rates, our benchmark rates were going to be. So that is why we went with that automatic adjusted for inflation. So specifically, let's look at FY 2020. So we would update the rates for FY 2020 to under 40, 40 to 70, and over 70. So those would be our benchmark levels that we would use. And then in 2021, we would update it to under 50, 50 to 90, and over 90. For FY 2022, we would update it to under 60, 60 to 110, and over 110. That would put us at FY 2022 in line with SRF benchmark rates. Now, one question that I had from someone last week was, well, OCRA's rates are always the combined rate, while SRF splits out their rates per utility. So OCRA combines the rates because that's the impact that the residents feel. So when we're talking a rate increase or a user rate, the residents, for us, feel the entire rate. So if we just look at one utility of water and they have a water rate of $30 and they're only raising it $5, that impact looks much smaller compared to if we look at all of the user rates being charged and maybe their whole user rate is already at 110 and you're adding $5 on top of that. That could really make or break many residents in some of our communities. So that is why we look at the combined rate. And so the rates that you have, that you're seeing before you are the SRF rates that we've transitioned and translated into a combined rate. So then in FY 2023, we would adjust annually for inflation. We would also tie it with SRF so that if SRF made additional adjustments that are above our adjustments, then we would do adjustments. We would always be looking at phased-in approach so that the rates don't spike. One thing that we were concerned with is what happened if we just jumped to the user rates for FY 2020 automatically. That's a big jump in user rates for many communities, and so we wanted to phase it in over time. So that's all the programs that we currently have. Now I want to go to a new program. So with the Responsive Needs Fund, this is a new program, and the whole idea is to allow us to have the opportunity to help communities that have needs that are outside of our traditional programs. These needs can be anything from public service programs to deal with our opioid crisis or other health services, or even housing needs such as residential demolition or upper story renovation. One thing that this program, where this program came from really came out of, I've had communities since I've been here that have come to me and said, we really need help with this issue. And there's no funding sources. Can we help? And it's one of those things, these activities that we're asking, they're eligible under CDBG, but we don't have a program for them. And so that's where this program came from. This program would mimic the way we handle urgent need. So if a community were interested or had a need, they would reach out to their community liaison or myself from at Wakefield, and then we'd have a discussion with them about that and go and work with them through that. So as a reminder, we did zero out this in the updated proposed budget. We still believe that this is a really good option and should be available for the state. But we understand that, this is something that it may take communities time to get used to. So putting funds towards that at this point may be jumping the gun a little bit. So we made that adjustment. So now we're going to look at some of the questions. And so before that, though, Jody would like just to say a few things.
Hi, everybody, again. So I hope some of this information was helpful. I see the comment thread. I think we appreciate the comments that are being submitted. We certainly will take those as public comments. If we did receive some questions, we certainly want to address those. So we're going to do our best to try to get those addressed. If not, we can try to do that post-webinar as well. But I just want to thank you. I hope this gave you some good information on some of the why behind the comments that we've seen. We will take as comments. We appreciate that, and we'll try to get your questions answered to the best of our ability.
Thanks, Jody. So we'll go through a couple of questions here. So the first question is related to the effectiveness of the Stellar Region program. And basically, are we looking at that in making these determinations and things like that? And the answer is yes. As I mentioned earlier in the webinar, that we are looking at, and we actually are already starting a study to look at the impact of not just Stellar, but of all of our CDBG programs. That project, we're still developing how that looks and everything like that, so we don't have any specifics on it, but it's a really big question, and we are interested in the impact, and the impact of our programs is something that we look at as we are making proposed changes. So another question was, will the slides be available along with the recording? Yes, we can make these slides available. I'll make sure to make those few corrections on the title of those few slides, but we'll make the slides available on our Consolidated Plan Action Plan webpage along with the recording. Another question, have the maximum amount of the funds changed for MSRP from the proposed plan? No, we have not proposed any changes to the maximum amounts for MSRP. And then another question was related to the I think there was a little bit of confusion related to the different programs. So, and I apologize, I'm reading comments and trying to talk at the same time. So basically the question is, what is the name of the legislative mandate for these changes? There has been no legislative mandate for these. These were recommendations from legislative task force. And so all agencies take legislative recommendations very seriously. And because if it's a recommendation, we then can work with the legislature to address that recommendation and come up with a way to best meet the needs. And many times what the possibility is, if the legislature decides that we have not addressed that recommendation, they can then make law for that. And so that's one thing where it's much more difficult to change laws. And so we like to work with the legislature when they make recommendations. And so the two task force was the Rural Water Task Force through the legislature, and then the Stormwater Task Force through the legislature, were those two task forces. So then another question, user rates will apply for all of the water programs, so that would be WDW and SIP. We have continued to look at SIP. While SIP does not have the grant maximum tie to user rates as that WDW does, the user rates do come into play on the program-specific items. So for SIP, the program-specific item user rates would be updated. And then for WDW, the grant maximum grant amount matrix and the proposed or the program-specific points would be updated to follow the new user rates. Another one is, what if an applicant has only one utility, i.e. regional sewer districts? So we would still look at the combined rates. So a regional sewer district can't be the applicant. That would be, it'd have to be the local unit of government. And so what we would look at is we would look at, okay, well, what are the user rates that those beneficiaries are paying on a combined level? And so that would be, something that if you have some concerns or confusion about that, definitely reach out to us and let's talk about that, because that it would be something of how do we put that, I can see the questions about how do we put that together in an application and show what those combined rates are. So next, so housing activities are under OCRA or IHCDA. So in the past, OCRA has always deferred to IHCDA because of their expertise in housing. And they have a capacity to run the OOR program that OCRA does not. However, OCRA does have the ability to be able to do housing projects that we are able to within our capacity. So a project such as an upper story residential project, we can handle that capacity, so we are able to do that. And so that's what I can definitely understand, kind of that confusion of it's always been IHCA that does housing. But that doesn't mean we can't, and if a community really needs that, we want to make sure our programs are addressing the needs of the communities. So then a question about the grant amount specifically. Those allocations are proposed based on what we're seeing and what's available. So if you have specific comments about how you think that should be changed, then please let us know. Those are the amounts we're proposing, but if you think we should put, instead of $2 million in PFP, you should think we should only have $1 million, please provide that comment either via email or on the survey. And I apologize, I'm losing my voice a little. And so it looks like one last question. Are there special considerations for PFP projects focusing on rural health, telemed, and or opiate addiction? That's a really good question. At this time, we've not proposed any changes to focus on those issues, but that could be something where we make a change to the program specific points. So I would say definitely that's a possibility, and if you have ideas of how we could do that, please let us know either via the survey or via official public comment, because that's something we could definitely look at if that is an interest of individuals. And so I've run out of cards to read, so I'm going to try to read this off of the screen. So it looks like there is a question about community distress points. As of right now, we have not seen a lot of feedback regarding community distress points. And it looks like the question is related to the maximum of 175 points. And so this is where, we are open to suggestions on how to make adjustments to the community distress points. And if there are other things we should be considering with the community distress points. So, is 175, that is the total possible with community distress, but like local match where we cap out at 75, should we put a cap to that? That's all are good suggestions that we would be opening to hearing from you all. So then there's some questions about small towns with gambling revenues can't afford the have a nationally certified Main Street. That is a question related to the Main Street program. And since I'm not an expert on that, I would say contact our Main Street individuals, or if I can get Matt Crouch in here to talk about that. Matt?
Yeah, I would just add to that, certainly the difference between the nationally accredited and the Indiana accredited is having that full-time staff member. So Indiana accredited are still eligible, since that's not a requirement for you to receive that certification. So the Main Street Revitalization Program is not exclusive to nationally accredited members only. The Indiana accredited are also eligible for the Main Street Revitalization Program. So certainly having a full-time staff member is not going to be a requirement to be eligible.
So yeah, thank you, Matt. Have a couple other questions. Sewer rates are on well water and not city water. That is a good point, and definitely something I would say please submit during the public comment, that we need to look at how the user rates would be impacted by the variations of those communities that are on different ones. So then there's a question about further changes to the allocation and further feedback. So we're going to be publishing this today. You can make comments on this. We will not be updating the draft until before the public hearing. Many of these changes will be in that draft, and so that will be what we are looking for comment on. You are welcome to comment on the changes that we've gone over today. Again, this PowerPoint will be published on our Consolidated and Action Plan webpage, and you can consider this a part of the process. So with that, there's one question about the philanthropic piece, and whether or not we should have more, award more points based on different things. So currently, if you have less than a certain percentage, you get 0 points, a percentage to a certain percentage, some points, and then all the points if you get above a certain percentage. And so the question kind of is there a way to make that more fair for a community where they, you know, maybe they didn't get that percentage, but they tried something. Shouldn't they get some points? And I think that's a really good point to bring up. And so that is something we would definitely be open to considering and looking at that. So, one more. So there was a question about staff attendance at the public hearing. So I will be at a central location projecting the public hearing just as we have done in the past. And so, but our community liaisons will be at the locations with that. With that, though, I would say if you have any questions, it is best to reach out to me. And so please don't hesitate to email me, call, and we can get something scheduled. It's best to reach out to Jackson sometimes, and so he can get something on my schedule. But if you have questions about what's being proposed, don't hesitate to reach out to us and to talk about that. At the public hearing, we will our focus will be on taking public comment, so we won't be able to really answer questions. And so the purpose of the public hearing is to take public comment. And so we won't be able to answer questions. So if you do have questions, definitely get those beforehand. However, we can submit public comment also in writing, and you can submit your questions in writing also. And if you have questions at the public hearing, you know, and afterwards, feel free to reach out to me, and I would be happy to answer your questions after the public hearing also. We have one last question related to the health issues and things like that. And so basically, I'm not familiar with this acronym, but the question is, are there plans to incorporate more SDOA, State Department of Health, thank you, Jody, elements in CDBG programs? At this time, we have not had those types of discussions. We have talked about ways to help with the opioid epidemic and other infectious diseases. But if you have ideas, we'd be more than, we're open to hearing those, and that would help us understand and create policy to address some of those issues. So thank you very much for all your time. I'm not seeing any more questions. Again, this was you know, an informational webinar. We will be posting it. Your comments can be submitted to the info@okra.in .in.gov email address or via the online survey. If you do have further specific questions or want to talk through an idea that you may have, you can reach out to myself or Jackson to get a phone call scheduled. And again, thank you all very much. Thank you for taking your time, and have a great afternoon.